Your soulmate finally admitted, "I still love them," in front of everyone. The room went dead silent. My beloved child. The room did not go silent because your soulmate raised their voice. It went silent because of the 4 words they finally stopped hiding: "I still love them." And the moment those words left their mouth, every face changed. Someone looked down. Someone else froze with a glass halfway to their lips. But your soulmate didn't move. They stood there as if they had just crossed a line they could never step behind again. What no one in that room understood was that this confession had been building for much longer than that evening. Your soulmate had tried to bury what they felt for you beneath distance, pride, distractions, and conversations that never quite reached the heart. Yet something happened just before that gathering, something connected directly to you. And it shattered the excuse they had been using to remain silent. Don't skip, because the confession itself was only the beginning. What happened immediately afterward revealed that at least one person in that room already knew the truth. For weeks, your soulmate had been behaving as though your chapter together was closed. Whenever your name came close to entering a conversation, they found a way to change the subject. Whenever someone questioned whether they had truly moved on, they gave a careful answer that sounded convincing enough, until that night. The conversation had started innocently. Someone mentioned relationships, regrets, and the people you never completely forget. Then one person turned toward your soulmate and asked a question they clearly weren't prepared for: if they walked through that door right now, would you still feel something? Your soulmate tried to smile. They looked away. For several seconds, they said absolutely nothing. Everyone expected a joke, a denial, anything that would make the moment less uncomfortable. Instead, their expression changed. The performance disappeared. And when they finally whispered, "I still love them," someone across the room reacted in a way your soulmate noticed immediately. That reaction mattered, because this person knew something about you that your soulmate had not yet been told. That was when the silence became almost unbearable. Your soulmate looked around and realized there was no taking those words back. But strangely, they didn't seem embarrassed anymore. They seemed relieved. One person quietly asked, "Then why have you been pretending you don't?" And that question opened a wound your soulmate had protected for a long time. They admitted they were afraid loving you openly would mean facing what really happened between you. The misunderstanding, the timing, and the decision they now wished they could undo. But before they could explain everything, the person sitting across from them interrupted. "There's something you need to know," they said. Your soulmate turned toward them, confused. Then this person revealed that they had recently learned something about your feelings, something that made your soulmate's face lose all color. Suddenly, admitting they still loved you was no longer the biggest revelation of the night. Because what they heard next made them realize they may have spent all this time running from a love that was never as one-sided as they believed. For a moment, your soulmate couldn't even respond. Their eyes stayed fixed on the person across the room, as though they were afraid one wrong movement would make the revelation disappear. "What do you mean it wasn't one-sided?" they finally asked. The answer came carefully. Apparently, not long ago, your name had come up in a private conversation, and someone had noticed something you tried very hard to hide. You hadn't spoken about your soulmate with anger. You hadn't dismissed what happened between you. Instead, there had been a pause, a small, emotional hesitation when someone asked whether you had truly stopped caring. That pause said more than a perfect confession ever could. Your soulmate leaned forward, suddenly forgetting everyone else in the room. They wanted every detail. What exactly had you said? When had this happened? And most importantly, why had nobody told them sooner? But the person holding the answer hesitated, because there was one specific thing you had said that could change everything. When those words were finally repeated, your soulmate's expression shifted completely. You had apparently admitted that losing them hurt differently because part of you never believed the connection was supposed to end the way it did. You didn't beg for them back. You didn't make dramatic promises. You simply confessed that sometimes you still wondered what would have happened if both of you had been brave enough to speak honestly before everything fell apart. That sentence hit your soulmate harder than anyone expected. Because while you had been wondering whether they forgot you, they had been asking themselves almost the exact same question. Stay till the end, because this is where their public confession became something much bigger. Your soulmate suddenly stood up and admitted that there was a reason they had kept their feelings hidden, and it wasn't because they were uncertain about loving you. It was because they believed you had already made a choice that left no place for them. Then someone quietly asked the question everyone else was thinking: what choice? Your soulmate took a long breath. They revealed that months earlier, they had heard something about you from someone they trusted. They were told you had moved forward emotionally, that reopening the past would only disturb your peace, and that contacting you would be selfish. So your soulmate stayed away. Every message they wanted to send remained unsent. Every moment they almost reached for you ended with them convincing themselves silence was the kinder option. But now the room felt different, because the person who had just revealed your lingering feelings slowly shook their head. That's not what happened, they said. Your soulmate went completely still. Someone had given them a version of your story that may never have been true. And when your soulmate demanded to know where that story originally came from, one person in the room suddenly refused to make eye contact. Your soulmate noticed immediately. Of all the people gathered there, only one person had suddenly become fascinated with the floor, and that tiny movement changed the entire atmosphere. Your soulmate turned toward them and asked quietly, "Was it you?" No answer came. That silence was enough. Everyone else began looking between them, realizing this was no longer simply a confession about unresolved love. Someone had interfered. Someone had allowed your soulmate to believe you had completely moved on, knowing that belief would keep them away from you. Finally, the person looked up and admitted they had repeated something they heard, but insisted they never meant to separate you. Your soulmate wasn't satisfied. Then tell me exactly what you heard. That demand made the person nervous, because the original conversation was nothing like the version your soulmate had eventually received. And once the real words were revealed, your soulmate understood how one small distortion had cost both of you months of silence. The truth was painfully simple. You had never said you wanted your soulmate gone forever. You had said you were trying to accept what happened because you couldn't keep waiting for someone who seemed unwilling to choose you. Somewhere between that sentence being spoken and reaching your soulmate, "I can't keep waiting," had somehow become, "I don't want them anymore." Those were two completely different meanings. Your soulmate closed their eyes when they realized it. They had mistaken your exhaustion for rejection. You had mistaken their silence for indifference. And both of you had been protecting yourselves from a heartbreak created partly by assumptions neither of you had challenged. Then your soulmate said something that stunned the room again. I almost contacted them 3 times. Not once. 3 times. Each time, they stopped because they remembered the warning that you supposedly wanted peace without them. But there was one attempt nobody knew about, because on the 3rd night, they had actually written the entire message. Someone asked whether they still had it. Your soulmate hesitated, reached for their phone, and stared at the screen. The message had never been deleted. It was sitting there exactly as they had written it, carrying everything they had been too afraid to send. Their thumb hovered over it while everyone watched. Then your soulmate began reading only the first few lines aloud. They had written that pretending not to miss you was becoming harder than admitting the truth. They had written that ordinary places kept reminding them of conversations with you, and that moving forward felt strangely like leaving something unfinished behind. But then they stopped reading. Their eyes had reached the final lines, and suddenly their expression changed. No, they whispered. They should hear this from me. That was when someone asked the question that shifted the night toward an unexpected decision. Then why are you still sitting here? Your soulmate looked toward the door, and what they decided to do next made everyone realize the confession had only been preparation for something much more personal. Your soulmate didn't answer right away. They simply stared toward the door while the weight of everything they had learned settled over them. Then they unlocked their phone again. Everyone expected them to finally send that old message, but they didn't. Instead, they deleted the draft. The room reacted with confusion until your soulmate said, "Those words belong to the version of me that was still hiding." They didn't want you receiving a carefully edited confession written months ago. If they were going to tell you they still loved you, they wanted you to hear the truth as it existed now, without excuses, without someone else interpreting it, and without another misunderstanding standing between you. Something huge was waiting for you, because your soulmate had finally reached the point where losing their pride felt less frightening than losing another chance with you. But before they could leave, someone near the doorway asked one question that stopped them cold: what if they don't want to hear it anymore? That possibility struck deeper than anyone expected. Your soulmate's confidence disappeared for a second, because loving you and knowing what you wanted were still 2 different things. They admitted they had no guarantee you would welcome them back. Maybe too much time had passed. Maybe the silence had changed you. Maybe hearing, "I still love you," would reopen something you had worked hard to close. But then they said something nobody in that room could argue with: they deserve the truth, even if the truth doesn't give me the ending I want. That sentence changed the mood completely. This was no longer about chasing a perfect reunion. It was about finally giving you the honesty you should have received from the beginning. Your soulmate decided they would not arrive unexpectedly or pressure you into an emotional moment. They would reach out first, gently, and give you the choice. Then they opened your contact, and froze when they saw something on the screen they hadn't noticed before. There was already a message from you. Not a new one from that exact moment, but one they had overlooked during the period when they were desperately trying to convince themselves not to look backward. Your soulmate stared at the timestamp, then at the preview, and their breathing changed. The message was short. You had asked whether the two of you could talk sometime because there was something you never properly explained. Suddenly, every person in that room understood what this meant. While your soulmate had been stopping themselves from contacting you, you had already opened a door, and somehow they had missed it. Don't skip, because the most painful detail was still hidden. Your soulmate opened the message expecting to find nothing more than that simple request. But beneath it was a second message sent later, one that began with words they were completely unprepared to read. I guess your silence gave me my answer. And what you wrote immediately after that made your soulmate realize exactly what their absence had made you believe. Your soulmate read the next line twice, because once wasn't enough to absorb it. You had written, I just wish you knew I wasn't reaching out to reopen old wounds. I wanted to tell you the truth before I finally let go. Those words landed harder than the public confession itself. Suddenly, your soulmate understood that while they had been convinced they were respecting your wishes, you had interpreted their silence as a final rejection. They lowered the phone and whispered, they tried. Nobody in the room spoke. There was nothing to say. You had tried to create the exact conversation your soulmate secretly wanted, and fear had kept them from seeing it. But one detail still didn't make sense. Your soulmate remembered checking your messages obsessively during that period. How could something this important have gone unnoticed? Then they looked at the date again, and remembered exactly what had happened that week. Their phone had been replaced after it stopped working unexpectedly, and during the transfer, several conversations had been muted and buried beneath older notifications. Your message hadn't been deliberately ignored. But from your side, there was no way to know that. All you saw was silence. Your soulmate's eyes filled with regret as they imagined what those unanswered days must have looked like to you. First hope. Then confusion. Then the slow conclusion that you had reached out one final time and they simply didn't care enough to respond. Someone quietly said, "You need to tell them that." Your soulmate nodded, but they refused to use the technical mistake as an excuse. Missing your message explained what happened, it didn't erase the hurt. So instead of sending a dramatic declaration, they began typing something surprisingly simple. I just found the message you sent me. I need you to know I never chose to ignore you. If you're willing, there's something I should have told you a long time ago. Their thumb hovered above the send button. This was the moment they had avoided for months. Once that message left their phone, there would be no pretending anymore. Everyone watched as your soulmate finally pressed send. No celebration followed. No one spoke. The same room that had gone dead silent when they admitted, I still love them, became silent again for an entirely different reason. Now they were waiting to discover whether you would answer. Seconds passed. Then a minute. Your soulmate placed the phone down, picked it back up, and tried not to stare at the screen. Finally, it vibrated. Their face changed before they even opened your reply. You had answered with only a few words. I wondered if you'd ever find it. But beneath that sentence was another message, and when your soulmate read it, they realized you already knew far more about their hidden feelings than anyone had expected. Your second message made your soulmate stop breathing for a second. Someone told me you almost reached out, but I never knew why you stopped." Suddenly, the mystery widened again. Until that moment, your soulmate believed their unsent messages had remained completely private. They looked around the room and asked, "Who told them?" Nobody answered immediately. Then one person slowly admitted that months earlier, your soulmate had mentioned almost contacting you during a vulnerable conversation. That person later crossed paths with someone close to you and let the details slip, not to interfere, but because they couldn't understand why two people who clearly still cared were refusing to speak. Somehow, that small piece of information reached you. So while you never knew what your soulmate had wanted to say, you knew they had come close. And that knowledge had left you with one painful question: if they still cared enough to reach for you, what made them pull away? Your soulmate finally had the answer, and this time they refused to let anyone else carry it. They typed slowly, "I stopped because I was told you had moved on and that contacting you would hurt you. I believed it. I shouldn't have assumed. I should have asked you." Then they added the sentence that made their hands tremble: "Tonight, in front of everyone, I admitted I still love you." They stared at those words before sending them, knowing how exposed they sounded. No carefully protected feelings anymore. No vague language. Just the truth. The message went through. A few moments later, the typing indicator appeared, disappeared, then appeared again. Your soulmate could almost feel your hesitation through the screen. Everyone else became background noise. Stay till the end, because your response didn't give them the easy reassurance they secretly hoped for. Instead, you asked one question that forced them to prove what their confession actually meant. Your message read, "Do you still love me because you miss what we had, or because you genuinely want to know who I am now?" Your soulmate stared at that question for a long time. It was fair. You weren't asking for beautiful memories or promises born from regret. You wanted to know whether their love could survive reality, the time apart, the changes, the things neither of you could simply undo. And for the first time that night, your soulmate smiled. Not because the answer was easy, but because they finally understood what you needed. They replied, "I don't want the old version of us back. I want the chance to meet each other honestly, without everyone else's assumptions between us." Then your soulmate added, "If you're willing, I'd rather say the rest with my voice." Your reply came almost immediately. It contained a time, a simple request to call you when they were alone, and one final sentence that made your soulmate quietly leave the room, because you warned them there was something about your separation they still didn't know. Your soulmate stepped outside and closed the door behind them, leaving every curious face on the other side. For the first time that night, there was no audience. No friend interpreting your words. No one filling the silence with assumptions. Just your name glowing on their screen and the realization that the next conversation could change everything. When the agreed time arrived, they called. You answered after a few rings, and neither of you spoke immediately. Then your soulmate said the words they had been carrying for months, "I'm sorry I believed other people instead of asking you." You didn't rush to comfort them. You simply told them the missing truth. Back then, you had never wanted them erased from your life. You had stepped away because their silence convinced you that staying emotionally attached was only hurting both of you. And the message they missed had been your final attempt to discover whether there was anything left worth saving. That was when your soulmate told you everything. They explained the false impression they had been given, the 3 times they nearly contacted you, the unsent message, and finally what happened in that room tonight. Their voice softened when they admitted, "Someone asked me if I still felt something for you, and I couldn't lie anymore. I said, I still love them." There was silence on your end, but this silence felt different. It wasn't cold. It was full of emotion neither of you wanted to rush. Then you said something your soulmate had secretly hoped to hear, but never expected.